They finally opened Henry VIII's tomb. What they found inside shocked the world. A forgotten royal tomb, lost for hundreds of years. A mummy with its red hair still preserved. A man covered in copper from his chest down to his feet. And children buried alongside a powerful pharaoh. All of these discoveries have raised questions that archaeologists still cannot fully answer. Some tombs may seem to contain nothing more than human remains, but when they are opened, they turn out to be like time capsules, filled with secrets powerful enough to make us rethink history itself. And sometimes, the dead have been lying still for thousands of years, yet what they left behind is even louder than the living. Hello everyone, welcome back to Ancient History, the place where we uncover the pages of history buried beneath the earth and explore mysteries that time thought it could hide forever. You know, archaeology can sometimes feel like opening a mysterious box without ever knowing exactly what is waiting inside. Sometimes, it is a precious piece of jewelry, an ancient sword, or an everyday object that seems completely ordinary. But other times, a single small detail on a skeleton can make an entire archaeological team stop and raise a long list of questions. And on today's journey, we will begin with Henry VIII, the famous King of England, who had 6 wives and left behind one of the most controversial royal stories in history. From his tomb, we will continue on to other extraordinary discoveries. A noble mummy in Peru with metal placed over its eyes. A red-haired man covered in copper in Russia. A 5,000-year-old woman whose skin and hair are still preserved, and even child mummies discovered inside the tomb of the pharaoh Tutenkhamun. Every discovery is a story. Every object is a clue. And sometimes, a single small clue can be powerful enough to shake everything we thought we knew about history. So what did archaeologists actually find? Join us as we uncover each layer of mystery and discover what the past has been hiding from us for hundreds and even thousands of years, right now. Henry VIII's tomb, more than 260 years later. The chilling secret inside stunned archaeologists. Have you ever wondered what truly remains inside a king's coffin after more than 2.5 centuries? It is not gold or silver, nor is it a crown, but the body of the man who once had an entire nation living in fear. And the king I am talking about is Henry VIII, England's famous monarch who had 6 marriages and died in 1547. But it was not until more than 260 years later that his burial place was reopened. And what was seen inside the coffin made the story of this king far more haunting. Henry VIII died on January 28, 1547, at the age of 55. After being prepared according to royal burial customs, his body was placed inside a lead coffin. According to his wishes, Henry wanted to be buried beside Jane Seymour, his 3rd wife and the mother of his only surviving son, Edward VI. On February 16, 1547, his coffin was taken to St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, England. Following a solemn ceremony, Henry's body was lowered into a vault beneath the choir of the chapel. The ceremony was extremely grand and dignified, but Henry still did not have the one thing he wanted most: a magnificent royal tomb. In fact, the king had been preparing for such a monument for years before his death. The initial plans were created by Italian craftsmen and later developed into a design of astonishing scale. The proposed tomb was to feature white marble, precious stones, gilded bronze angels, statues of saints and apostles, and even an idea to place a life-size statue of Henry VIII on horseback beneath a triumphal arch. If completed, it could have been one of the most magnificent tombs in Tudor England. But wars in France and Scotland had drained the royal treasury. Construction was repeatedly delayed. After Henry's death, Edward VI wanted to complete the tomb, and Elizabeth I also ordered the project to be reconsidered. But in the end, everything remained unfinished. Many of the components were left behind at Windsor and were later sold or reused. Some bronze candlesticks were even taken to St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent, Belgium. But what about Henry? He remained in the old vault. Then history brought another king to the same place. In 1649, after King Charles I was executed, his remains were secretly brought into that same vault and placed near Henry VIII. From that point onward, the vault continued to be forgotten. That changed in 1813, when workers were constructing a passage leading to a new royal burial vault and unexpectedly rediscovered the old chamber. When they entered, they found several coffins, including those of Henry VIII, Jane Seymour, and Charles I. But the condition of King Henry's coffin immediately attracted the most attention. Henry's coffin was recorded as being in severely damaged condition. It was no longer intact as one might expect from the final resting place of a king. Some parts appeared to have broken apart or collapsed. Meanwhile, Jane Seymour's coffin remained in considerably better condition. So what had happened to Henry? No one can say for certain. One theory suggests that the supporting structure beneath Henry's coffin had collapsed over time. Another theory proposes that the coffin may have been damaged when Charles I's coffin was placed inside the vault in 1649. It is also possible that the coffin was struck or damaged during transportation. But what truly makes this story so strange are the records concerning the body inside. Henry had been embalmed and placed inside a lead coffin, but after more than 2 centuries, his body would inevitably have undergone natural decomposition. What remained was not the image of an intact king dressed in royal clothing, as we might commonly imagine. Later records indicate that the coffin had deteriorated to such an extent that identifying and preserving what remained inside became a significant concern. By 1888, when Charles I's remains were returned to the vault, the construction supervisor A.Y. Nutt documented the condition inside with photographs. By then, Henry's coffin was visibly damaged, creating a striking contrast with the enormous power he had possessed during his lifetime. And this is perhaps the greatest secret of that coffin. Not a treasure, not a cursed object, but very real evidence of how time ultimately defeated a king. Henry VIII once possessed enough power to change the religion of an entire nation. He ordered the execution of those who opposed him, lived in magnificent palaces, and planned a tomb that would surpass the scale of those built for his parents. Yet more than 260 years later, when the vault was rediscovered, his coffin had decayed and suffered severe damage. No army, no throne, no crown, only the remains of a man who had been dead for centuries. And perhaps that is the most thought-provoking detail of all when we look at Henry VIII's coffin. Whether you are a king or a commoner, in the end, time treats us all the same. So if you are still alive today, live your life to the fullest and do not waste it competing with anyone else. That may be the truest meaning of life. Do you think so too? Let me know in the comments below if you agree with me. The Kiko Rontoy mummy with a strange tattoo and metal pieces over the eyes, the mark of a noble? If one day you walked into an ancient tomb and saw a mummy with 2 pieces of metal covering its eyes, what would you think? A religious ritual, jewelry, or perhaps a way for ancient people to mark someone of special status? All of these possibilities are conceivable. But you know what? The story I am about to tell you is even more fascinating than that. Because behind this unusual face lies an entire world of power, status, and rituals that modern people can only gradually decipher. What exactly did this power and status mean? What kinds of rituals did ancient people perform for the dead? Let's travel back to Rontoy, Peru, an ancient settlement located in the Huara River Valley, where the river begins to widen before flowing toward the Pacific Ocean, and find out. This was once the land of the Chankay, a culture that flourished along the central coast of Peru from around 1000 AD until the 15th century, before the region came under the control of the Inca Empire. In 2008, during an archaeological survey in Rontoy, researchers discovered a tomb made of mud bricks, built on a raised platform inside a structure constructed from adobe bricks. Inside the tomb was the mummy of a man who was approximately 30 years old, with several unusual features. Anthropologist Kit Nelson of Tulane University in New Orleans, who was directly involved in the research and helped remove the layers of wrapping around the mummy, reported that the man's face contained handcrafted metal pieces, including copper and silver. Another piece had been placed inside his mouth. His face was also covered with a layer of red pigment made from cinnabar, a mineral containing mercury sulfide that was commonly used in ancient rituals and decorative practices. From these details, researchers quickly realized that this was not an ordinary burial. Instead, the man appeared to have been treated in a very special way. According to Peruvian archaeologist Guillermo Koch, the red pigment and metal pieces on the man's face were important signs suggesting that the person buried here may have belonged to a high social class. In simple terms, the Chankay may not have wanted merely to preserve his body. They may also have wanted those who came after him to know this was once a person of great importance, but that was only the beginning of the story. When experts continued examining the body, they discovered a thin, elongated black tattoo running along the area of the knee joint. According to Kit Nelson, tattoos of this type appeared to have been associated with the elite. Just imagine, more than 1,000 years ago, long before modern machinery, medical clinics, or laser equipment existed, a person carried a deliberately created mark on his body. And that mark was still visible when scientists removed the layers of fabric hundreds of years later. Doesn't that show us that the human body can sometimes be like a history book? Every tattoo, every object, every layer of fabric, and even every piece of food placed beside the dead can tell part of a story. Even more remarkably, when experts took X-rays of the mummy, the results showed no clear signs of severe skeletal trauma. A visual examination also revealed no obvious fatal injuries. Because of this, researchers considered the possibility that the man had died from an illness, although the exact cause of death was never conclusively determined. The body had been carefully prepared. The internal organs had been removed before the body was placed within multiple layers of preservation materials. The deceased was wrapped in finely woven textiles, with numerous objects placed alongside him as offerings. In the layer closest to the body, researchers also discovered 2 cotton objects, one white and one brown. Kit Nelson even described them as particularly strange, because the research team had never encountered exactly the same type of objects in similar cases. But that was not all. Inside the burial chamber, there was also corn, silver beads, and a wooden figurine. These seemingly simple objects helped experts gain a clearer understanding of the deceased's social position. Most notably, corn was found in considerable quantities around the mummy. To us today, a few kernels of corn might seem completely ordinary. But to the Chankay and other ancient agricultural communities of the Andes, corn was an extremely important source of food. It was not only eaten as food, but was also used to produce chicha, a fermented alcoholic beverage that was widely consumed throughout the Andes. Archaeologist Guillermo Koch once emphasized that corn held tremendous value in the daily life of ancient communities. Therefore, the corn placed around the mummy may not have simply been leftover food. It could have been part of a ceremonial offering for the deceased. But what made the scene even more remarkable was not only what surrounded the mummy. Something unusual was also found in the mummy's own hands. On the right arm and hand, researchers discovered that the man appeared to be holding an empty woolen pouch along with 2 thread bracelets. These objects may have had ritual or social significance, although their exact purpose still cannot be determined with complete certainty. And of course, we cannot overlook the name Kiko Rontoy, which is used for the mummy in popular accounts. The more researchers examined each individual detail, the more reasons they had to believe that this was not an ordinary man. A man approximately 30 years old, whose body had been carefully prepared, whose face was covered in red pigment, who had copper and silver metal pieces placed over his eyes and inside his mouth, who had a distinctive tattoo on his body, and who was surrounded by grave goods and offerings. All of these clues seem to be coming together to form a picture, a person of status, a person respected by his community, and perhaps a member of the Chankay elite. 800-year-old red-haired mummy and the mysterious copper-masked cemetery in Russia. What would you think if, in the frozen lands of northern Russia, archaeologists dug into the ground and discovered a man who had been dead for nearly 800 years, yet his hair was still there? But that's not all. His body had been preserved in an extraordinary way, with sheets of copper covering him from the chest down to his legs, and right beside him were an iron axe, pieces of fur, and various metal objects. It is hard to believe that a body nearly 800 years old could still retain so many remarkably intact details, isn't it? But the truth is, this really happened. The discovery was documented at the Zeleny Yar burial site in the Yamalo-Nenets region of northern Siberia, Russia, near the Polui River. This is an extremely harsh environment located north of the Arctic Circle. The freezing climate and unusual soil conditions in the area helped preserve some ancient human remains to an astonishing degree. During excavations carried out from the late 20th century into the early 21st century, archaeologists discovered 34 graves at the site. And what surprised them was that many of the bodies had preserved more than just their skeletons. Some still retained soft tissue and other traces of the human body. These people had been buried approximately 800 years ago, primarily during the Middle Ages. But before we talk about the red-haired man, try to imagine what the scene looked like beneath the ground. Layer by layer, the soil was carefully removed. A copper mask appeared, then another sheet of copper, and finally, the shape of a human body emerged. For archaeologists, it was like turning the pages of a book without knowing what the next page would reveal. Some of the remains were discovered with their faces covered by copper masks. In some cases, the bodies were also covered with animal materials such as fur or hides from reindeer, beavers, and bears. This suggests that the people who lived in this region had a distinctive burial tradition in which metal and animal hides may have played an important role. Then they discovered an even more unusual group of mummies. Among the remains were one woman, one child, and 3 infants who had been buried within layers of protective materials associated with copper and animal fur. These discoveries left experts with an important question. Why were the children buried in such a special manner? Was this simply a traditional practice of the community, or did each material have its own spiritual meaning? However, the main focus of the excavation remained the red-haired male mummy I mentioned at the beginning. His striking red hair stood out against the dark soil, making the remains particularly unusual. His body had been placed inside a wooden burial structure, with the torso covered by sheets of copper. Beside the body were an iron axe, animal fur, and a bronze buckle. To modern people, these might look like nothing more than old objects, but to archaeologists, they were important clues that could help reveal who this man had once been. Was he a warrior, a leader, a person of special status? Or were these simply objects given to the dead for their journey into the afterlife? The question became even more fascinating as researchers continued to uncover numerous pieces of jewelry and artifacts from very different origins throughout the cemetery. Among them was a bronze bowl believed to have originated from Persia, dating to approximately the 10th or 11th century. There were also iron knives, a silver medallion, and a bronze bird figurine dating to approximately the 7th to 9th centuries. Think about that for a moment. How could a community living in such a remote part of Siberia nearly 1,000 years ago have obtained objects connected to regions thousands of miles away? This raises a remarkable possibility. The people who lived here may have been part of a vast trade network connecting Siberia with other regions across Eurasia. In other words, the land we see today as cold, remote, and almost isolated may once have been a crossroads for people, goods, and cultures. But there was still another detail that particularly caught the researchers' attention. Many of the bodies discovered at the cemetery were found with their bodies oriented toward the Poli River. According to researcher Natalia Fyodorova of the Russian Academy of Sciences, this arrangement may not have been accidental. It could have been connected to the religious beliefs or burial rituals of the ancient community. And this is precisely what makes Zheliny Yar one of the most mysterious archaeological sites in Siberia. Because we are not simply looking at 800-year-old mummies. We are looking at the traces of a vanished community, people who once lived, loved, fought, had children, and eventually were placed beneath the earth according to rituals that today we can only speculate about. And what about the red-haired man? Perhaps he once held a special position within his community. But after nearly 800 years, his true identity remains hidden in silence. No one can say with certainty who he really was, not even experts with years of experience studying the site. And perhaps that is one of the most haunting things about archaeology. Every time we think we understand the past, another ancient grave appears and forces us to start questioning everything all over again. 5,000-year-old remains still have skin and hair, the secrets of a Caral noblewoman revealed. If you think that after 5,000 years, the human body would inevitably be reduced to nothing but bones, then the next discovery may make you think again. Because in a coastal region of northern Peru, archaeologists once opened an ancient tomb and discovered something that seemed almost impossible. A woman who had died approximately 5,000 years ago, yet whose remains still preserved skin, hair, and fingernails. Even more remarkable, the objects buried alongside her revealed a story about social status, trade, and the role of women in one of the oldest civilizations in the Americas. The discovery was made at the Aspero archaeological site in the Supe region, Barranca province, Peru, an important site associated with the Caral civilization, also known as the Norte Chico civilization. The excavations were conducted by Dr. Ruth Shady Solus and her research team from the Caral archaeological zone, with support from Peru's Ministry of Culture. You know what? Aspero was once an important coastal settlement closely connected to the urban network of Caral, a civilization that developed around 3000 to 1800 BC. And then, inside an ancient tomb, archaeologists encountered a scene that forced them to proceed with extraordinary care. The person inside was a young woman, initially estimated through analysis to have been approximately 4 feet 11 inches tall, but her height was not what attracted the experts' attention the most. What was truly astonishing was the condition of her remains. They reported that after thousands of years, some portions of her skin, hair, and fingernails were still preserved. Think about how long 5,000 years really is. That was a time when many of the famous cities of the ancient world had not yet appeared. Even the famous pyramids of Giza in Egypt would not be built until centuries later. And yet, in this region, the body of a woman still retained physical traces of her own body. How difficult is that to imagine? What makes this even more remarkable is that the human remains discovered at Aspero were not typically preserved in such an intact condition. The burial conditions, the way the body was wrapped, and the local environment may all have contributed to this unusually high level of preservation. But this woman was not simply placed into the ground. After she died, her body was wrapped in multiple layers of materials, including cotton textiles, reed mats, and a type of fabric made from macaw feathers. Such careful preparation suggests that her death was not treated as an insignificant event. The living had devoted considerable time and effort to preparing her for her journey into the afterlife, according to their beliefs. But if the layers of fabric already intrigued archaeologists, the grave goods found inside were even more remarkable. Inside the tomb, the research team discovered an intricately woven headdress, baskets made from reeds, a decorated bone needle, seashells originating from the Amazon region, and an inlaid toucan beak, along with numerous tools associated with textile production and fishing. Most notably, more than 30 sweet potatoes had been placed within the burial area. At first glance, these might seem like nothing more than ordinary everyday objects, right? But to archaeologists, every object was another piece of the puzzle. Together, they suggest that this woman may have lived in a community with relatively sophisticated production, craftsmanship, fishing, and trading activities. Even more significant were the materials that originated from distant regions. For example, the seashells and items associated with the Amazon region suggest that the exchange networks of the Caral people may have extended much farther than we once imagined. Based on the overall characteristics of the tomb, experts concluded that the woman likely held a relatively high social status within her society. And this is where the discovery becomes especially thought-provoking. In many stories about ancient civilizations, we tend to imagine that power was primarily held by men. But discoveries from Caral are helping create a much more complex picture. From settlements and ceremonial architecture to distinctive burial sites, archaeological evidence suggests that women may have played important roles in the social life of this civilization. The woman discovered at Aspero, therefore, was not simply a remarkably preserved body. She was also like a doorway, allowing us to look into ancient Peruvian society approximately 5,000 years ago. What is truly astonishing is that she lay silently beneath the earth for thousands of years, while the people who once knew her disappeared long ago. There are no stories left, no recorded name, no stone monument describing her life. And yet, her preserved hair, the remaining skin, and the objects placed beside her continue to speak on her behalf. And perhaps that is why, from what seemed like a silent and forgotten tomb, we may have uncovered a much bigger truth. Women may have played a far more important role in the oldest civilization in the Americas than history has traditionally recognized. If that is indeed the case, then this truly is a fascinating discovery. Wouldn't you agree? 29 skeletons beneath an ancient temple, rewriting the history of pre-Inca civilization. Have you ever wondered what would happen if an ancient temple contained more than just crumbling walls, pieces of pottery, or ritual objects, but beneath it also held dozens of human skeletons? And even more disturbing, what if some of them were children? Did they die in a disaster, a war, or were they brought here as part of an ancient ritual? That question emerged at Huaca Santa Rosa de Pucallá in the Lambayeque region of northern Peru, when archaeologists discovered an ancient burial cluster containing as many as 29 human skeletons, including 3 children and 1 adolescent. These individuals had been buried more than 1,000 years ago, and the discovery forced experts to reconsider the extent of the influence of the Wari civilization on the northern coast of Peru. Huaca Santa Rosa de Pucallá was far from an ordinary site. It was an ancient ceremonial center featuring a distinctive D-shaped structure built around AD 800 to 900. The site is located approximately 466 miles north of Lima, in a region that was once a crossroads for several major cultures of ancient Peru. During excavations, the research team led by archaeologist Edgar Bracamonte discovered a ceremonial temple containing 29 human skeletons. But what immediately caught the experts' attention was the cultural origin of the people buried there. Of the 29 skeletons, 25 belonged to the Mochica or Moche culture, while 4 were identified as being associated with the Wari culture. And this is where the story begins to become truly fascinating. The Wari civilization flourished in the central Andes of Peru from approximately the 7th to the 13th century, while the Moche civilization once thrived along the northern coast of Peru from approximately AD 100 to 700. These two cultures were not simply communities living in the same place at the same time. So why were traces of both cultures found within the same ceremonial center? That is precisely the question that makes this discovery so important. According to Edgar Bracamonte, this was the first discovery directly associated with the Wari civilization to be found this far north, beyond their primary area of activity. This raises the possibility that Wari influence in the Lambayeque region may once have extended much farther than researchers had previously believed. But among the people buried here, the group that attracted the most attention was the 3 children and 1 adolescent discovered in the area in front of the temple. Researchers believe that their location and burial circumstances may have been connected to ritual sacrifice. If this hypothesis is correct, these children did not die accidentally. Instead, they may have become part of a religious ceremony carried out by the community. Just thinking about that is enough to send a chill down your spine. Thousands of years ago, rituals that are difficult for modern people to comprehend may have taken place here. People may have believed that offering human lives could help them communicate with the gods, seek protection, or maintain the sacred order of their community. Yet archaeology does not only tell stories about death. Within the burial areas surrounding the temple, researchers also discovered pottery fragments, remains of South American camelids such as llamas and alpacas, as well as guinea pigs. These artifacts and animal remains help experts develop a clearer picture of the material life of the people who once lived here. In particular, the 25 skeletons belonging to the Moche culture suggest that this site may have played an important role during the period before Wari influence became clearly established. And when this discovery is considered alongside other archaeological discoveries in Peru, the historical picture becomes even more fascinating. In 2006, archaeologists discovered the mummy known as the Lady of Caral, a powerful woman from the Moche culture dating to approximately the 5th century. The discovery caused a sensation because it provided strong evidence that women may once have held positions of leadership within Moche society. Earlier, in 1987, the archaeological world was also stunned by the nearly intact tomb of the Lord of Sipan, a powerful Moche figure. The tomb contained numerous valuable grave goods and became one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Peru. Together, these discoveries reveal something important. The history of ancient Peru was far more complex than the simple image of one civilization rising and then disappearing. At Huaca Santa Rosa de Pucallá, the 29 skeletons add another important piece to that puzzle. They suggest that the Lambayeque region may once have been a place where multiple cultures met, competed, and influenced one another. And that is why this discovery is about far more than a group of graves more than 1,000 years old. It may help archaeologists answer a much larger question: how far did the Wari really reach, and how did they influence the societies of northern Peru? Perhaps the people buried beneath this ancient temple had remained silent for more than a millennium. But Nimatayao, every skeleton, every fragment of pottery, and every surviving trace is slowly beginning to speak. And those 29 people buried beneath the earth may now be helping us rewrite part of the history of pre-Inca civilization. a part of history we once believed we understood, but that we may now have to look at in an entirely different way. 2 baby girl mummies in Tutankhamun's tomb, revealing a heartbreaking secret of the Egyptian royal family. Dear friends, when we think of Tutankhamun, perhaps the first image that comes to mind is his magnificent golden mask, the treasures filling his tomb, and the story of the young pharaoh who became one of the most famous figures of ancient Egypt, right? But there is another secret hidden deep inside his tomb that you may not know about. It is far less glamorous, yet it has deeply moved and astonished researchers. It is the discovery of 2 tiny mummies of baby girls who never got to see the light of the world. So who exactly were these 2 mummies, and why were they found there? Let's travel to the Valley of the Kings, near Luxor in southern Egypt, where pharaohs and other powerful figures of the New Kingdom were buried from approximately the 16th to the 11th century BC to find the answer. This was also the place where British Egyptologist Howard Carter discovered Tutenkhamun's tomb in 1922. At the time, Carter could hardly believe what he was seeing. After years of searching, he had found a nearly intact tomb containing thousands of precious artifacts prepared for the young king's journey into the afterlife. From the golden death mask and throne to chariots and countless funerary objects, everything inside helped make Tutankhamun a name known around the world. But among all that gold and treasure was one very small discovery. It was the 2 fetal mummies I mentioned earlier, found inside the tomb. These tiny remains were later studied and preserved at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, before collections associated with Tutankhamun were gradually transferred to the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza. At first, researchers could not be certain what relationship the 2 children had to the pharaoh. But then, modern technology began unlocking the mystery. Genetic analyses showed that the 2 fetuses were very closely related to Tutankhamun and were identified as the 2 daughters of the young pharaoh. One fetus was estimated to have been approximately 4 months into development, while the other had developed to nearly full term. In other words, both had died before they were born. That is an incredibly heartbreaking detail, but in the context of ancient Egypt, it also carries a particular significance. Professor Salima Ekram, an Egyptology specialist at the American University in Cairo, has noted that infant and child mortality rates were extremely high in the ancient world. Therefore, the loss of a fetus before birth was not necessarily unusual. What was unusual was this. These 2 fetuses were carefully mummified and placed inside the tomb of a pharaoh. Try to put yourself in the position of the ancient Egyptians at that time. Tutankhamun was a king. He had power, wealth, and a tomb prepared for his journey into the afterlife. If they had wanted to, the royal family could certainly have arranged a separate burial place for the children. So, why were the 2 fetuses placed alongside their father? This is precisely the question that has led to debate among experts. Egyptologist Joyce Tildesley offered a particularly interesting explanation for their presence. She suggested that the 2 tiny remains may have had a ritual significance, describing them as something like a final insurance policy for Tutenkhamun's journey into the afterlife. It may sound difficult to believe, but remember that the ancient Egyptians placed enormous importance on life after death. They prepared food, clothing, tools, weapons, and countless other objects for the deceased. They believed that the afterlife was not the end, but rather a continuation of existence. Therefore, the more protection and support a person had for the journey beyond death, the more secure they would feel. According to this interpretation, the 2 baby girls may not have been buried with their father simply because they were related to him by blood. They may have been regarded as companions or protectors of Tutankhamun in the afterlife. In ancient Egyptian art, women and children sometimes appeared in roles associated with protecting or accompanying male members of the family. Therefore, these 2 tiny mummies may have served a ritual purpose that went far beyond simply being the pharaoh's children. And this makes the story of Tutankhamun very different. We usually remember him through his golden mask, his treasures, and his immense wealth. But behind the image of a young and powerful king was a family that may have faced deeply painful losses. Tutankhamun ascended to the throne as a child and ruled for approximately a decade. He died when he was only about 18 years old, around 1323 BC. The premature death of the young pharaoh has made his life one of the great mysteries of ancient Egypt. And now, the 2 tiny remains inside his tomb reveal another side of his story. He was not simply a wealthy king preparing for the afterlife. He was also a father who may have taken his unborn children with him into the very place where he was buried. Perhaps we will never know exactly what Tutankhamun thought about those two children, but after more than 3,000 years, the tiny mummies are still there, silently telling a story about family, death, and the beliefs of ancient Egypt. You see, inside a tomb filled with gold and treasure, sometimes the most moving part of history is not the enormous wealth, but two tiny lives that never had the chance to cry out at birth. And the story of Tutankhamun is one of the most powerful examples of that. A 4-foot curved sword, a giant weapon found in an ancient tomb in Russia. Hey, if one day you walked into an ancient tomb and saw a sword nearly as long as the height of an adult, what would you think? Perhaps many of you would immediately imagine a giant warrior, right? Because I would think the same thing, and even archaeologists once had a similar idea. But you know, history always seems to have a few big surprises waiting for us. And this time, the surprise came from a tomb in Russia dating back approximately 800 years. Inside the tomb, archaeologists discovered a sword like this. It measured about 4 feet long, yet the person buried inside was nowhere near 6 feet 6 inches tall, as we might imagine a giant warrior to have been. So who was this enormous sword actually made for? That question takes us to the Eagle's Nest Cemetery in the Astrakhan region of southern Russia, where archaeologists carried out important excavations in 2025. The area contains numerous traces of communities that once lived across the Eurasian steppe during the Middle Ages. During that excavation, researchers discovered approximately 50 graves, and one of them quickly became the center of attention. It was Grave 53. The grave was oval-shaped and dated to approximately the middle of the 13th century, meaning it was around 800 years old. Inside were the remains of a man who had been placed with his face oriented toward the east. There were also traces of a dark-colored material covering parts of the body, which experts believe may have been the remains of leather armor and an iron helmet, but the objects lying beside the skeleton were what truly caught everyone's attention. Archaeologists discovered one flat-headed arrowhead, 2 square-headed arrowheads, and a curved-bladed sword placed inside a wooden scabbard. At first glance, this could have been the equipment of a medieval warrior, but when experts measured the sword, they noticed something highly unusual. The sword was nearly 4 feet long. To put that into perspective, this was considerably longer than many swords from the same period, which were often only around 2 feet long. So why would such an unusually long sword appear in a tomb in the Astrakhan region? Even more astonishingly, the sword had not simply been left underground in the usual manner. It was discovered still intact together with the surrounding soil, with a total weight of approximately 33 pounds. Restoration specialist Mikhail Golovachov said that conservators needed approximately 4 months to treat and restore the artifact. This was far from a simple task. The sword had been buried underground for hundreds of years, meaning that even one incorrect movement could damage the remaining metal or organic materials. Interestingly, the wooden scabbard itself played an important role in helping the sword survive until today. It sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? Wood usually decays very easily over time, but in this case, the interaction between wood and iron oxides helped preserve parts of the scabbard while also creating conditions that allowed the sword to survive in an unusual state. Only after the restoration was complete could archaeologists clearly see the weapon's full shape. And that was when the biggest question emerged. Who could have used a sword that was nearly 4 feet long? According to Mikhail Golovachov, this may not have been a mass-produced type of weapon. Experts speculate that the sword may have been specially made for someone nearly 6 feet 6 inches tall, because a person of that height would have been better able to use the weapon and draw it from its scabbard. If that were the case, we could be looking at evidence of a warrior whose physical stature was extraordinary compared with that of his contemporaries. But then the next discovery complicated the theory. When experts examined the skeleton inside the grave, they determined that the man buried there was only about 5 feet 9 inches tall, not close to 6 feet 6 inches, not a giant, and certainly not the kind of enormous warrior experts had initially imagined when they saw the sword. So what happened? There are several possibilities. The man may genuinely have used the sword even though it was unusually long. Not every long weapon necessarily had to be made specifically for someone of corresponding height. But there is also another possibility. The sword may not have been the deceased man's personal weapon. Instead, it could have been a grave offering placed in the tomb as a symbol of status, power, or warrior identity. And this contradiction is precisely what makes Grave 53 so fascinating. Because if the sword really belonged to the man buried there, why would a man who stood about 5 feet 9 inches tall possess a weapon measuring nearly 4 feet? And if it did not belong to him, then who did the sword originally belong to? Was it a trophy brought back from another land? Was it a special gift given to the deceased? Or did it once belong to a warrior of unusual stature and later get buried with someone else as a symbol? For now, we still do not have a definitive answer, but those unanswered questions are exactly what make archaeology so fascinating. A sword is not simply a sword. It can reveal clues about metalworking technology, combat techniques, social status, cultural exchange, and even the stories of the people who once held it. After nearly 800 years, the man in Grave 53 can no longer tell us his story, but the nearly 4-foot-long sword is still there. And perhaps this strange weapon will help researchers learn more about the warriors who once traveled across the Russian steppe during the Middle Ages, a place where every ancient grave opened can reveal an entirely different secret. It certainly could, because the ancient world contains so many mysteries that we, as modern people, may never be able to uncover all of them. Dear friends, we've just journeyed together through a series of mysterious archaeological discoveries, from the tomb of Henry VIII to the extraordinary mummies found in Peru, Russia, and Egypt. Each artifact and every skeleton seems to tell a story that remains unfinished, but not every mystery has been solved. Perhaps it is precisely these unanswered questions that make history so fascinating. So, what about you? Which of the discoveries we explored today do you think is the most mysterious and made the strongest impression on you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you also love unsolved mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Ancient History channel and join us as we continue exploring the mysteries of the past. For now, goodbye, and we'll see you in the next adventure.